The fishing trawler Northern Drifter was a rust bucket with a heart of gold, at least that's what we told ourselves. It had been my life for the past 6 years, pulling up cod and halibut from the frigid waters off the coast of Maine. The crew was small, just 4 of us. There was me, Ben, old man Silas, the captain, who had more salt in his veins than blood, Finn, the loud-mouthed Irishman with a joke for every situation, and Maria, the quiet, sharp-eyed deckhand who could mend a net faster than any of us. We were a family out here, bound by diesel fumes and cold winds. Our last trip had been a bust, so we headed further north than usual, chasing a whisper of a good haul. We were a few hundred miles from shore, just us and the endless gray sea. That's when we found it. We were pulling up a net when the winch groaned and then gave out with a final, metallic shriek. The net was snagged on something heavy, something big. We all gathered at the rail, staring into the dark water. Silas, a man who had seen everything, was quiet. He wasn't giving orders, just watching the line stretch taut. "She's caught on a wreck, Captain?" Finn asked, his voice losing its usual bravado. "Could be," Silas said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Or something else." We spent the next 2 hours with the spare winch trying to free the net. We pulled and whatever was down there didn't budge. We were about to cut the line when the tension suddenly eased. The net came up, dripping and empty, but something else came with it. Snagged on the twisted lines was a small wooden crate. It was old, covered in a slimy green moss that smelled like decay and dead fish. We hauled it onto the deck and set it down. It was no bigger than a toolbox, its corners reinforced with rusted iron bands. There was no latch, no lock, just a single corroded brass plaque on top. The words "Property of SS Persephone" were barely visible under the grime. "The Persephone," Maria whispered, her eyes wide. "That ship went down 50 years ago. Vanished without a trace." Silas didn't say a word. He just stared at the box, a grim expression on his face. He pulled a pry bar from a nearby rack and, with a single, practiced motion, forced it under the lid. The wood splintered and the lid came off with a sickening crunch. Inside, nestled on a bed of old, waterlogged cloth, was a small, ornate music box. It was a beautiful thing, carved from dark, polished wood, with tiny, intricate gears visible through a glass panel on the side. But it was the sound that got us. It wasn't the tinkling of a lullaby or a waltz. It was a low, mournful hum. A sound that seemed to resonate not just in the air, but inside your head. It was a tune that was sorrowful and haunting. "Don't touch it," Silas said, his voice unusually sharp. "Leave it alone." We did as he said, but something about the box had changed the atmosphere on the ship. The mournful hum seemed to follow us, a constant, low drone that was just at the edge of hearing. Finn was the first to show the strain. He stopped telling jokes and started muttering to himself, his eyes darting nervously around the deck. "You hear that?" he asked me one night. "Sounds like someone singing. Crying maybe." I told him it was just the wind, but I knew it wasn't. Then Finn started talking to the box. He would stand over it, whispering to it, and then he'd get this distant look in his eyes. We tried to talk to him to snap him out of it, but he just stared through us. One night, I found him on the deck, crouched over the music box, his hand hovering over it. "It's calling to me," he mumbled, his face pale in the moonlight. "It wants me to open it." "Finn, it's already open," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Don't be crazy." He looked at me, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "No, the other one. The one inside." He pointed at the music box. The glass panel showed the intricate gears, and in the center there was a small, locked compartment. We hadn't noticed it before. We knew then that something was seriously wrong. Finn wasn't just going crazy, something was affecting him, the music box. We tried to convince Silas to throw the box overboard, but he just shook his head. "We can't," he said, his voice flat. "It's a bad omen to toss something the sea has given you." His words were chilling, and for the first time, I wondered if Silas wasn't just a tough old captain but a man who understood these old horrors too well. The hum from the music box got louder, more insistent, and Finn got worse. He stopped sleeping, and we would find him at all hours talking to the box. He wasn't just muttering now, he was pleading. "Just tell me what you want," he'd say. "Please just tell me." The next night I was on watch with Maria. We were at the stern, checking the nets, when we saw Finn standing at the rail. He was swaying back and forth and he was singing. Not one of his usual shanties, but the same mournful tune that came from the music box. His voice was a thin, high wail that cut through the wind. Maria and I looked at each other, our blood turning to ice. We started to move toward him to try to pull him back, but we were too late. He just leaned back, his arms held wide, and slipped over the rail and into the dark, churning water below. We ran to the rail, screaming his name, but there was no sound. The waves swallowed him up in an instant. We stood there for a long time, staring at the empty sea, the hum from the music box a taunting melody in the air. When we turned around, Silas was standing behind us, his face unreadable. He hadn't come to help, hadn't sounded the alarm. He was just watching, a silent sentinel of a tragedy he seemed to have expected. "Why didn't you do anything?" Maria sobbed, her hands shaking. Silas didn't answer. He just looked from us to the spot where Finn had disappeared. "The sea takes what it wants," he said, and then he walked away, leaving us alone with our grief and the haunting hum of the music box. The Northern Drifter felt less like a ship and more like a tomb now, with 3 of us left to bear witness to whatever hunger was lurking in the deep. The days that followed Finn's disappearance were a living nightmare. The mournful hum of the music box seemed to permeate the ship, a constant, low-frequency hum that vibrated in our bones. We couldn't escape it. The sound was in the crew quarters, in the galley, and on the deck. It felt like it was coming from inside our heads, a siren song of pure sadness. Maria and I were on edge, our nerves shot. We jumped at every sound, every shadow. We'd look at each other, our eyes silently asking the same question. How long until it takes one of us? Silas, the captain, was a ghost. He kept to the bridge, emerging only to perform his duties with a chilling efficiency. His silence was the loudest thing on the ship. We tried to talk to him to get some kind of explanation, but he'd just look at us with those cold, gray eyes and turn away. One evening, I saw him standing over the music box, his hand inches from it. He wasn't touching it, just observing it like a scientist studying a specimen. I'd almost expect to see him take out a notebook and jot down observations, but he simply stood there, a strange sense of reverence in his posture. The real horror started when we found the chart. Maria and I were in the mess hall trying to eat, when the humming from the music box got louder, a low guttural note that made the hair on my arms stand up. We went to the galley and found the chart, one of the old ones Silas used to navigate, rolled out on the table. It wasn't a regular map. It was a grid with different symbols, written in a cramped, precise script that looked like Silas's. It was a list of rules. Do not rescue anything that the sea returns. Never enter the bilge. Do not look into the light. Do not interfere with the offering. I read the list out loud, my voice trembling. "What is this?" I asked, my eyes wide. Maria was staring at the last rule, her face a mask of horror. "The offering," she whispered. "That's why he didn't help Finn." I felt a cold wave of nausea. Silas wasn't just a quiet captain. He was a warden, a keeper of some kind of terrible secret. He was performing a ritual, making an offering to whatever was in the deep. We decided to confront him, but he was gone. We searched the entire ship, and he was nowhere to be found. The last place we checked was the engine room, a hot, oily cavern that smelled of diesel and metal. He wasn't there. But there on the floor was his cap, soaked and dripping with dark, reddish liquid. It looked like blood. My heart pounded against my ribs. "He's gone," Maria said, her voice a ghost of a whisper. "The sea took him." But I didn't believe it. The rules didn't say anything about the sea taking the captain. It only took the crew members. The hum from the music box was now a deep, resonant tone, like the lowest note on an organ. It vibrated through the metal hull of the ship, a constant, low drone. Then we heard footsteps on the deck above. They weren't Silas's heavy, rhythmic steps. These were lighter, quicker, and had a strange, dragging sound with them. Maria and I looked at each other, our fear a palpable thing between us. We crept up the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible, and peeked through the door. What we saw made me freeze. It wasn't Silas. It was something that looked like Silas. It wore his clothes, his cap, and it had his face, but it moved with a strange, jerky, unnatural gait. Its limbs bent at odd angles, its head swiveling to track something in the darkness. It was carrying something, a heavy sack that it dragged across the deck, leaving a dark, wet trail behind it. I saw its face for a moment in the dim light of the deck, and my stomach turned. Its skin was pale and waxy, and its eyes, Silas's eyes, were completely black, like 2 holes in its skull. It wasn't Silas. It was a thing wearing Silas's skin like a suit. "He's back," Maria whispered, her voice choked with terror. The sea brought him back. But what had come back wasn't our captain. It was a new kind of horror, one that moved with the precision of a puppet and the intent of a predator. I knew what the rules meant now. The ocean didn't just take. It returned, and what it returned was a vessel for its own dark purpose. We were no longer just a crew on a ship. We were its next victims. The sight of that thing, the thing wearing Silas's face, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. Maria and I didn't say a word. We just backed away from the door, silent as ghosts, and stumbled down to the crew quarters. We slammed the heavy steel door shut and locked it, our hands shaking so bad we could barely turn the bolt. The two of us stood there, leaning against the cold metal, our breath coming in short, ragged gasps. What was that? Maria finally whispered, her eyes wide with a fear I felt mirrored in my own. I don't know, I choked out. But it wasn't Silas. We spent the rest of the night huddled in my bunk, listening. We heard the footsteps above us, the same dragging, uneven steps we'd heard before. The sounds would start at the stern where the music box was, then move across the deck to the bow, then back again. It was a rhythmic, tireless patrol. Sometimes we'd hear a soft thud, like something heavy being dropped, followed by a scraping sound. We didn't talk. We just listened, our bodies tense, our minds racing, trying to make sense of a nightmare that was now our reality. The next morning, the ship was silent. The humming from the music box had stopped. It was replaced by a different kind of quiet, a silence that felt heavy and thick like a blanket of dust. We waited for an hour, then two, before we finally decided to brave the deck. We armed ourselves with a couple of wrenches we'd found in the storage locker, our makeshift weapons feeling pathetically small against whatever was out there. The sun was just rising, casting a cold, watery light over the deck. We crept up the stairs, our hearts pounding. We saw it right away. The main deck was slick with something dark. Not blood, not exactly. It was too thick, too oily. It ran in a winding trail from the stern to the bow, then back to the stern again, just like the footsteps we'd heard. At the end of the trail, near the winch, was a large, heavy sack, the kind we used for hauling up a big catch. The sack was tied off with rope, and it was still, but something about its shape was wrong. It wasn't full of fish. It was shaped like a man. A wave of nausea hit me. I'd seen the words on the chart, the offering. This was the offering. This was what the sea had returned, and this was what it had demanded. But whose body was in the sack? Finn was gone. Silas was, well, I didn't know what Silas was. Was it another crew member we didn't know about, someone from the Persephone? Or was it something else entirely? As we stood there trying to process the horrifying scene, we heard a sound from the bridge. The door creaked open and the thing that looked like Silas emerged. It was moving slowly with that same unnatural gait, and it was carrying the music box. It placed the box on the deck, right next to the sack, and then it just stood there, staring out at the sea. Its black eyes were fixed on the horizon, and it didn't seem to notice us. We have to get rid of the box, Maria whispered. It's the source. It's what's controlling him. I knew she was right. The box had been the starting point of all of this. The humming had driven Finn mad, and it had somehow called that thing back. If we could get rid of it, maybe we could stop this nightmare. But getting to the box meant getting close to that creature. We came up with a plan. Maria would create a diversion, drawing its attention to the bow, while I crept up from the stern and tossed the music box overboard. It was a desperate, half-baked idea, but it was all we had. We separated, and I watched as Maria made her way to the bow. She started making a racket, banging a winch handle against the railing. The creature's head snapped toward her with that impossible, bird-like motion. It started moving toward her, its legs jerking and bending in ways that defied human anatomy. I used the opportunity to sprint toward the stern. My heart was in my throat, but I was focused. I reached the box and grabbed it. The wood was cold and clammy, and the strange, rhythmic thrumming started again the moment I touched it. It was like holding a tiny, beating heart. I ran to the railing and was about to toss it into the waves when a voice called out, "Ben, don't." It wasn't Maria. It was Finn. I spun around. He was standing at the stern, not a scratch on him. He was soaking wet, but he was smiling. "I'm back, man," he said, his voice a flat monotone, echoing that of the creature Silas. He took a step toward me, and I noticed something was wrong. His hands were pale and shriveled, and his fingers were unnaturally long. When he smiled, I saw that his teeth were sharp like tiny needles. "The sea sends things back," he said, his smile never wavering. "Didn't the captain tell you?" My mind reeled. The first rule, do not rescue anything the sea returns. Finn had been the first offering, the first to be taken, and the first to come back. The humming from the music box hadn't been a lure. It had been a key, a signal to the deep, and the sea had answered. I felt a cold dread crawl up my spine. I was trapped. In front of me was the creature Silas, moving toward Maria, and behind me was Finn, the thing wearing Finn's skin, blocking my escape. I had the box in my hands. The low, mournful hum was getting louder, a song of sorrow and hunger. I didn't know what to do. My plan had fallen apart. "Give me the box, Ben," the Finn thing said, its voice a hollow whisper. "It belongs to the ocean." I took a step back, holding the box away from him. "No," I said, my voice shaky. "This ends now." I looked at Maria, who was still drawing the creature Silas's attention, unaware of the new threat behind me. I had to make a choice. I could run, but where would I go? The ship was a steel coffin, and the sea was waiting. I had to fight. I made a break for it, trying to get around the fin thing and back to Maria, but it was faster than I expected. It moved with a lurching, broken rhythm, like a marionette with its strings cut, but it was quick. It grabbed my arm with a wet, cold hand, and its grip was like steel. I cried out in pain as its sharp fingers dug into my skin. I brought the wrench down on its head with all my might. The wrench connected with a sickening thud, but the thing didn't even flinch. It just looked at me, its black eyes unblinking, and smiled with those needle-like teeth. I realized then that it wasn't a living thing. It was just a shell, an empty suit of skin animated by something else, and it felt no pain. I had one chance. I lifted the music box high over my head and slammed it down on its head with all my might. The wood splintered with a dry snap, and the gears and springs went flying across the deck. The mournful hum died instantly, replaced by a deafening silence. The fin thing went limp. It stood there for a moment, swaying, then collapsed to the deck, a lifeless puppet. The smile was gone from its face, replaced by a slack-jawed, vacant stare. The terror was gone, but so was Finn. I stood there, panting, the remains of the music box in my hands. The silence was absolute, a chilling stillness that felt more final than any sound. I looked up. The creature Silas had stopped moving toward Maria. It was standing motionless, its head cocked to one side as if listening to a sound that wasn't there. Then it slowly turned its head and its black eyes found me. It wasn't Silas anymore, not even a thing wearing his skin. It was just an empty vessel, a hollow shell. And it was enraged. It moved toward me, but not with that jerky, broken gait from before. It moved with a terrifying grace, a speed and purpose I hadn't seen before. It was coming for me, and I knew there was nowhere left to run. My fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The rules of the game had changed, and now there were no more offerings. Only a final, desperate struggle for survival. The Northern Drifter was no longer attuned for the sea's offerings. It was an arena, and I was the only fighter left. The silence was deafening. The broken music box lay on the deck, a splintered testament to the terror that had been unleashed. But the silence didn't last. A low, guttural growl came from the thing wearing Silas's face. It was no longer moving with that unnatural, disjointed gait. It moved with a terrifying grace, a speed and purpose I hadn't seen before. It was coming for me, its black eyes fixed on my face with an animalistic hunger. It wasn't Silas anymore, not even a thing wearing his skin. It was just a vessel, an empty shell consumed by an ancient rage. I looked around frantically, my mind racing. Maria was still at the bow, unaware of what was happening. I had to get to her, to warn her. I made a break for it, sprinting toward the bridge, hoping to get to the radio and send out a distress call, a final desperate plea for help. But the creature was fast. It covered the distance between us in a few impossibly long strides, its arms held out like a hunter closing in on its prey. I swerved at the last second, and it crashed into the railing, the metal groaning under the impact. I didn't stop. I kept running. I reached the bridge and slammed the door shut, fumbling with the lock. I looked back and saw the thing's face pressed against the glass, its black eyes staring at me. It was breathing heavily, a wet, rattling sound that made my skin crawl. It was right there, on the other side of the glass, a nightmare come to life. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed the ship's emergency flare gun from its case and fired one into the sky, a bright red streak cutting through the morning fog. Maybe, just maybe, someone would see it. Maybe, just maybe, the Coast Guard would send a ship. The thing was relentless. It was pounding on the door now, the heavy steel denting under the force of its blows. The glass was starting to crack. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I had to get out to find Maria. I ran to the back of the bridge, my eyes scanning the deck below. I saw her. She was staring at the crumpled form of the fin thing, her shoulders shaking, her head in her hands. She was a sitting duck. I had to do something. I grabbed the ship's emergency axe from its mount on the wall and broke through the back window of the bridge. The cold air rushed in, and I felt the spray of the ocean against my face. I landed on the deck below and ran toward her, the axe held high. "Maria," I screamed. "Get up. We have to go." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and grief. "Finn," she whispered, pointing at the motionless body on the deck. "He's gone." "I know," I said, grabbing her arm and pulling her to her feet. "But we have to move. He's coming." I pointed to the bridge and she saw the dented door and the crack in the glass. Her face went pale. The creature Silas was already on the deck, moving toward us, its head tilted, its black eyes fixed on us. It had a wrench in its hand now, one of the ones we had left on the deck. It was moving with a purposeful stride, a chilling parody of a human walking. "The bilge," Maria said, her voice a rush of panicked words. "The second rule. We're not supposed to go in there. Maybe that's where we'll be safe." I remembered the rules on the chart. Never enter the bilge. Maybe it was a warning, or maybe it was an unspoken instruction from Silas, a place where we were never meant to hide. I didn't care. It was our only option. We sprinted to the hatch that led to the bilge, our feet pounding on the metal deck. We could hear the creature's heavy, dragging footsteps right behind us. I threw the hatch open, and the smell of mold and stagnant water rushed out. We climbed down the ladder, Maria first, then me. I pulled the hatch shut behind me and locked it, the metallic click a small victory against the monster above. We were in a dark, dank space, the air thick with the smell of decay. The bilge was a vast, open area filled with pipes and machinery, the ship's guts laid bare. We huddled behind a stack of old, rusted parts, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. We could hear the thudding above us, the thing trying to get in. But the bilge hatch was old and heavy, and it wouldn't budge. We were safe for now. We sat there for what felt like hours, listening to the pounding on the hatch. Then the pounding stopped. We waited in the dark, our hearts pounding, listening to the silence. But it wasn't silent. A new sound started, a low, wet scratching, a sound that seemed to be coming from the bilge itself, from all around us. The sound was getting closer, moving through the pipes, under the metal flooring, and toward us. The creature Silas hadn't come down here to find us. It had sent something else. We looked at each other, our eyes wide with fear. We had followed the rules, gone where we were told not to go, and now we were trapped in a dark, wet maze with something we couldn't even see. We could hear it now, a soft, slithering sound and a wet, sucking noise. The smell of decay was overwhelming. It was the smell of the music box, the smell of death. "It's everywhere," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "It's in the water, in the pipes. It's in the ship itself." I felt something brush against my leg, something cold and slimy. I let out a cry and stumbled backward, shining my flashlight at the floor. A dozen black, glistening slugs as long as my arm were slithering toward us. They were moving with a deliberate, synchronized rhythm, their bodies pulsating with a sickly green light. I swung the axe at them, but they just melted into the pipes, their bodies seeming to disappear into the metal. I turned and ran, Maria right behind me, our feet splashing in the shallow, oily water on the bilge floor. We ran through the labyrinth of pipes, the scraping and slithering sounds of the slugs echoing all around us. We were no longer hunting for a way out. We were running from a ship that was now a living, breathing monster. The old, rusty vessel had become a tomb for us, the final offering to the ancient things in the deep. We ran until we couldn't run anymore, our lungs burning, our legs screaming in protest. We found ourselves in a dead end, a small, dark corner with no way out. The scraping sounds were getting louder, the slugs were closing in on us, and we knew we had to fight. We huddled together, the axe in my hands, a wrench in hers, our backs against the cold, metal wall. We were ready to face our end. The slugs emerged from the darkness, a writhing, pulsating mass of glistening blackness. They were faster than before, more determined. They were coming for us, their bodies moving as one. I swung the axe and Maria threw the wrench, but it was useless. The slugs just dissolved into the metal, only to reappear a moment later, inches from our feet. There was no way to stop them. There was no way to escape. The ship was their home and we were its unwanted guests. I looked at Maria, and in her eyes, I saw a profound sadness, a deep resignation. We had fought so hard, but it was all for nothing. The sea had won. It had taken everything from us. Our home, our sanity, our lives. The slugs reached us, and I felt their cold, slimy bodies crawling up my legs, their needle-like teeth biting into my flesh. I screamed, and the sound was swallowed by the deep. I felt myself fading, my body giving in to the cold, slimy terror. My last thought was of home, of a life I would never see again, a life that was now just a distant memory.